Welcome back to Another Explainers, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic that sounds complicated but is actually super fascinating once you break it down. We're going to decode the absolute alphabet soup of national income accounting. You know, we constantly hear acronyms like GDP, GNP, and NNP thrown around on the news. But what do they actually mean for a country's wealth? And honestly, what do they mean for your wallet? Today, we're going to map out exactly how national wealth is generated, how it's measured, and how it ultimately filters all the way down to your household budget. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We're going to decode national wealth, check out the 3 core lenses used to measure the economy, follow the money through the income filtration pipeline, unpack real versus nominal growth, and finally, expose the GDP welfare illusion. Starting off with Section 1, Decoding National Wealth, the Big Picture.
And Section 2, the 3 core lenses, Measuring the Economy.
So to really wrap our heads around this, you have to imagine a country's national income as this massive, giant reservoir of wealth. It's generated by the entire economy over the course of a single year. Now, to figure out a nation's economic health, economists have to precisely measure every single drop of value in that reservoir. But how do they actually do that? Well, they look at the exact same pool of money through 3 distinct analytical lenses. Let's look at the first lens, location versus residency. Here, we're comparing domestic product to national product. Domestic product is strictly geographical. Think about a massive foreign car plant operating right inside your country's physical borders. Even if the profits ultimately go overseas, the value produced by that factory counts toward your domestic product simply because it was made on your soil. National product, though, that follows the people. It measures the output produced by the citizens and residents of a country, no matter if they're working right down the street or halfway across the globe.
And this brilliantly illustrates how we connect the two. Notice how the concept of net factor income from abroad, or NFIA, acts as this vital bridge. It perfectly connects those geographic boundaries to citizen residency. NFIA is literally just the math of taking the income your country's residents earned abroad and subtracting the income that foreigners earned inside your borders. If you take your strictly geographical domestic product and add that NFIA bridge, boom, you arrive exactly at your national product.
All right, the second lens economists use is all about the physical reality of equipment. Look, every single time an economy produces something, machinery grinds down, factory roofs spring leaks, delivery trucks rack up miles. This wear and tear is a highly tangible reality. When we measure gross product, we're essentially looking at total output with rose-colored glasses, totally ignoring all of that wear and tear. But when we look at net product, we face reality. We deduct that consumption of fixed capital, which is just a fancy way of saying depreciation. So moving from gross to net simply means acknowledging and subtracting that inevitable depreciation.
Then we have our third lens, which is essentially a tug-of-war between government policy and business reality. We're comparing market price to factor cost. When you buy something, you pay the market price, right? And that price includes indirect taxes that the government places on the consumer. But the businesses actually making the goods, they care about the factor cost. That's the actual sum total of payments made for wages, rent, interest, and profits just to make the item exist in the first place. To get from what you see on the shelf at market price down to the true factor cost, we have to strip away those indirect taxes and add back any government subsidies that might have artificially lowered the price.
To put that into perspective for your own wallet, let's look at a really concrete example. Imagine you walk into your local market to buy a kilogram of rice. The price tag says 45 rupees. You pay 45 rupees. That is your market price. But behind the scenes, the true resource factor cost to produce that rice, what the farmer actually paid for wages and rent, was 50 rupees. No way, right? How does that work? Well, because the government wanted to keep staple foods affordable, they stepped in and provided a 5 rupee cash grant, or subsidy, directly to the producers. That policy intervention lowered the open market price. So you pay 45 at the store, even though the true factor cost of production was 50.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, the income filtration pipeline from macro to micro.
So, we know how to measure the giant reservoir of national wealth. But how does that money actually filter down into your individual pocket? I want you to picture this entire process as a giant, slightly leaky funnel. At the very top, the widest rim of this funnel, capturing absolutely everything, is national income. In strict economic terms, national income is defined as the net national product at factor cost. It's the sum total of all factor incomes earned by a nation's residents during the year. But here's the catch. You don't actually get to take all of that home. As the money moves down the funnel, things start leaking out. It's literally like an obstacle course for money.
We start at the top with national income. First, government enterprises take their cut of income and savings, which leaves us with private income. But the gauntlet isn't over yet. Corporations don't just hand you all their profits, right? They hoard retained earnings for future expansion, and they have to pay corporate profit taxes. So those leak out next, leaving us with personal income. Finally, the taxman steps in one last time, taking a slice through direct personal income taxes and miscellaneous fines. What miraculously survives this entire obstacle course and drops out the very bottom of the funnel is personal disposable income. This is the actual, final spendable cash that households can split between consumption and saving.
Moving on to Section 4, real versus nominal growth.
Now that we see exactly how the money reaches us, we really have to ask if the growth of that money over time actually means anything. Think about it. If a country's total income doubles in a single decade, are the citizens truly twice as wealthy? Or is our wealth just an illusion caused by rising prices?
So the crucial point is understanding the difference between nominal and real GDP. Nominal GDP is calculated using current, everyday prices. If inflation inflates our currency like a balloon, nominal GDP goes up, even if the actual number of boxes we produce stays exactly the same. This creates a completely false sense of richness. It's kind of like making twice as much money at your job, but suddenly a gallon of milk costs triple. You feel richer on paper, but you're actually poorer at the grocery store. Real GDP, on the other hand, uses a price index to strip the hot air out of that balloon. It calculates value based on constant base year prices. By eliminating that deceptive effect of price changes, real GDP reflects true growth in the actual volume of goods and services being created. And that is exactly why it's the absolute gold standard for comparing economic performance internationally.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the GDP welfare illusion.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is, even if we correctly use real GDP, and even if we adjust it for population by looking at real per capita income, does a rising economic curve actually guarantee that everyday citizens have a better standard of living? Honestly, even if the numbers look fantastic on a chart, economists point to 6 specific veils that heavily obscure the truth behind a rising GDP curve. Let's lift those veils one by one.
First up, income distribution. A surging GDP can aggressively mask severe internal wealth inequality. If an economy has 1 new billionaire and 99 broke citizens, the average income looks amazing, but the general welfare is actually terrible. Second is the composition of output. Producing massive amounts of military defense armaments swells the GDP figures rapidly, for sure. But manufacturing tanks and missiles doesn't elevate a family's living standard the way civilian consumer goods do. Third, the manner of increase. If GDP is skyrocketing only because of ruthless environmental pollution, child labor, or exhausting working hours, actual human welfare is actively falling despite the booming numbers. Fourth, regrettable necessities. This one is a real paradox. A massive environmental oil spill actually boosts GDP because of all the billions spent on cleanup crews. But that spending merely returns society to its baseline. It doesn't create any new wealth. Fifth, the monetization gap. Informal barter systems, growing your own vegetables, or unpaid domestic care are completely invisible to GDP because no official money changed hands, even though they heavily contribute to survival. And sixth, omitted quality of life. GDP raw numbers completely ignore the value of your lost weekends, mounting mental stress, and crucial health indicators like life expectancy.
When you look at those 6 veils, it entirely changes how you view the evening news reporting on economic growth, doesn't it? If the ultimate goal of macroeconomic growth is the actual well-being of the population, then relying solely on GDP leaves a massive blind spot in our vision, which leaves us with a final, really vital thought to ponder. Should we stop tallying output and start measuring life? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking great questions, and I'll see you in the next one.